Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This next video is all about a combined test I got done at Newcastle University. So I reached out to a guy called Adrian Holiday from the Newcastle Uni Instagram page. I just gave him a DM and I said, look, I'm looking to get a lactic threshold test done because I seen Scott Beattie and Rory Leonard from Morpeth had theirs done, and I really wanted to know what my sort of threshold pace was. I've got a half marathon coming up in 3 weeks on Saturday now. So I DM'd Adrian on Instagram and just asked for pricings and his sort of availability. So he replied quite quickly and said it was £120 for the combined test. The first test was sort of an incremental test. You started running on the treadmill at easy pace. So for me that was about 12 to 13 kilometers an hour. And every single 3 minutes you jump off, they take a prick of your finger and do the sort of lactic reading, and then you jump back on the treadmill straight away. You maybe have about 15 seconds break in between and then back on for another 3 minutes, but the next time you jump on, the pace is increased by a little bit. So the paces I sort of did on the first test were 12 kilometers an hour, 13 kilometers an hour, and then from then on it went up in 0.5 kilometers an hour segments. Eventually I got to 18 and a half, and it was, you know, I'd been running on the treadmill for 40 odd minutes and it was starting to get quite hard. I think when your lactic starts going up, you'll see on the graph here, LT2, for someone of my ability, I got down to about 520, 510 per mile. It was starting to become quite hard, and then I jumped off and my lactic reading was starting to go quite high. So then that was the first test finished. So the second test was a VO2MAX test. So you started just below threshold, and then every single minute the treadmill increased by 0.5% of incline, or it increased speed as well. I think I got to about 10 minutes and it was getting really hard. I was nearly sprinting up an incline of nearly 3%. I think I got my heart rate up to 190, which was very hard for me. I think max heart rate for me at the moment is about 190, 191. So I was really pushing. So the reason why I got this test done was to sort of identify my training paces. I do a lot of double thresholds, and I just thought, you know, I don't actually know what my threshold is. So if I got a test done like this in a controlled environment, I would know exactly sort of what my threshold was. It's good to sort of see where you're at. It's good to, if you've got a goal race coming up, it's good to know what paces you can sort of hold. If you know your LT2, which is what you're supposed to hold for an hour, is 5:20 pace, you're not going to go off for a half marathon in 5:10 pace, because you're just going to die, aren't you? I've got Prague half marathon coming up in 3 weeks on Saturday, so I was kind of hoping my LT2 would be about 5:17. It was actually a little bit slower, so it was 5:22. So I've basically got 5 or 6 weeks from this test until the race to try and get that number as low as I possibly can. So on race day, average 5:19s, just under 5:20s, and break that big 70-minute barrier. I've got to say the facilities were great. It was getting really hot in there and they had this huge fan that kept us cool. It is quite annoying running with a mask on and you've got the heart rate monitor on your chest and you've got tubes coming out of you, and it's not ideal, but this is what you need to do to get accurate readings. What they measured during the test was lactic threshold, sometimes referred to as LT1, lactic turn point, LTP, which is referred to as LT2, running economy, maximal aerobic capacity or VO2max, and VO2max. So that's the sort of minimum running speed at which you'll reach your VO2max. So what's great about this test is on the first incremental test, you get a lactic reading before you start running. Then obviously every single pace change, you can plot on a graph what your lactic in your blood was. So you get a graph at the end. So this lactic profile graph, you can see as my speed goes up towards 18.5 kilometers an hour, my heart rate's climbing and climbing and climbing until it gets up to 180 odd. And you can see on this graph that the lactic, which is measured in millimole per litre, that gets measured along the side. And as you can see, at 18 kilometers an hour, it sort of shoots up, and that's the lactic turn point. So, you know, if you're running a 10-mile race or maybe a half marathon, depending on how strong you are, your LT2 is pretty much what you should hold for 10 to a half marathon. So the report came back, my lactic threshold was 16 kilometers an hour, which is 6-minute miling pretty much. And my heart rate was 159. And my lactic turn point was 522 per mile and 179 beats per minute. So Adrian sent us some training zones. So zone 1 would be easy to moderate. A lot of people get this wrong. They do their easy runs too quick and they're not recovering in between sessions. So mine, it's pretty vague, but it just says anything up to 6-minute miling, you know. But when I do my easy runs, I like to hover around about 130 beats per minute, which usually spits out about 7-minute miling. Then you've got zone 2, which is quicker than 522, and VO2MAX, which came out with 504. I'm not entirely sure that that top end reading's correct, because I done a race the other day and I had 2 hills per lap, and it was 2.2 mile, and I managed to hold 450 per mile for 2.2 mile. And that VO2MAX reading there, 504 per mile, is what you can hold for up to 11 minutes. So I'm not entirely sure that that top end reading is correct. But so my VO2MAX came out at 60 millilitres per kilogram per minute, which is in the range that we would like to see for a well-trained athlete, sort of demonstrating sound aerobic capacity. Adrian said that he thinks this is an area that can be progressed. He would like to see it up towards the mid-60s, you know, 65. If I did increase that sort of VO2MAX into the mid-60s, he said he would see a lot of improvements in race performances, particularly around 5k to 10k type effort. So my running economy at 6-minute miling came out at 189. Typically, we consider a value of less than 200 as excellent for a high-level athlete, with a value of under 220 considered good. So running economy is one of my strengths. Running economy becomes more important in distances beyond 10k, so that might serve me quite well in Prague in the half marathon. So basically what come out of the test was that I probably need to slow down a little bit when I do double threshold days. That's more towards the top end of the threshold sort of spectrum, where it's nearer my LT2 and it might be a bit too much. If I'm covering nearly an hour over 2 sessions in one day, that might be a bit too much and I'll not recover in time. But one benefit of the test was this running economy. I must be quite efficient. If I'm being honest, I'm slightly disappointed that my VO2MAX wasn't a little bit higher. It'd be nice to get that up towards 64, 65 maybe in the future, and bring that threshold pace down from 6 minutes maybe down to 5:40s. So I think £120 for the test's not too bad. I mean, you've got 2 people in there, you've got to use the facilities. It's Adrian's time afterwards, and you actually get a follow-up call as well. And he's going to discuss sort of race predictions for my upcoming races and sort of any questions I've got regarding the test. Is that a cool hat? You got Daddy's cap on. So thanks for watching, everyone. The usual, like, comment and subscribe. And let us know in the comments if you've got any questions, and I'll leave you with Maya walking properly.